Hello, my name's Robert Dean Steele, and we are looking at Psalm 78. Now, this is one of the longer Psalms, and it talks about what the Lord did with the nation of Israel in the past. It's a maskal, and it's from Asaph, and he's reflecting on the history of Israel, and also as well, a maskal happens to be a illumination of a divine thought or a wise saying. O my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I open my mouth in parables, and I utter hidden things from the things of old. So here he is. He says, we are about to bring some sayings of old, parables of the past. Jesus himself would use parables. What we've heard and known, what our fathers have told us, we did not hide from our children. We will tell the next generation. So here he is. I'm reciting this today because I want the next generation to know. He says, the praiseworthy deeds of our Lord, the power and wonders that he has done. He says, we're letting people know about the praiseworthy things that the Lord has done and his wonderful deeds. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded to our forefathers to teach their children. He says, we're passing on to the next generation the things that they need to know about the Lord. So the next generation will know them, and even children yet not born. And they in turn will tell their children. This little psalm is a historical record for the generations. That they would put their trust in God and they would not forget their deeds or not, but keep his commandments. That's what he says. The three reasons. Number one, put their trust in God. Number two, not forget their deeds. And they would also keep his commandments. They would not be like their forefathers, stubborn and rebellious generation, whose hearts were not loyal and whose spirits were not faithful to God. He says, don't be like the past generation. Men of Ephraim, armed with bows, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant. They refused to live by his law. They forgot what he has done, the wonders he's shown. He did miracles in the sight of their fathers. In the land of Egypt, in the region of Zoan. He says, people forget what God has done. I mean, look what he did back in Egypt. He divided the sea and led them through, and he made the water stand firm like the wall. He guided them by a cloud by day and with light by fire all night. So he led them through the sea, and then he guided them with his presence, fire by night and cloud by day. He split the rocks in the desert and gave them water as abundant to the seas. He says Moses did that. He brought streams from the rocky crag and made water flow down like rivers. But they continued to sin against him, rebelling in the desert against the Most High God. Even when God did all of these things, what did they do? They still rebelled. They willfully put God to the test by demanding the food they crave. They spoke against God. Can God spread a table in the wilderness? The hunger that they were facing, they basically tested God. When he struck out the rock, water gushed out and the stream flowed abundantly. And then they said, can he supply and give us food for his people? Yes, God can. They did not believe in God or trust in his deliverance. They were walking by sight and not by faith. Yet he gave command to the skies, and he opened up the doors of heaven. He rained down manna for the people to eat, and he gave them the grain of heaven. You know, manna actually means, what is it? But it's special supply by the Lord supernaturally. Men ate the bread of angels, and he sent them all the food they could eat. He says this is angel food they were getting. He loosed the east wind from the heavens and brought forth the south wind by his power. He rained down upon them like dust, the flying birds of the sand of the seashore. He gave them, they came down inside the camp around all their tents, and they ate enough till they were filled, for he had given them what they craved. He says he gave them quail without measure. But before they had turned from their food they craved, while it was even in their mouths, God's anger rose against them, and he put to death the sturdiest among them, cutting down the young men of Israel. Here they were grumbling, and then God in his anger brought them down. God's anger rose against them. In spite of all this, they kept on sinning. In spite of all his wonders, they did not believe. And so he ended their days in futility and their years in terror. Basically, what happened was that entire generation perished in the desert. Whenever God slew them, they would seek him and they would eagerly turn to him again. So when God brought his judgment, all of a sudden everybody was righteous. They remembered that God was their rock, God, the Most High, was their Redeemer. But then they would flatter him with their mouths, lying to them with their tongues. So they would follow the Lord for a little while, but then they would turn from him and go in their own wicked ways. Their hearts were not loyal to him, and they were not faithful to the covenant. Yet he was merciful. He forgave their iniquities and did not destroy them. Time after time, he restrained his anger and did not stir up his full wrath. Even in spite of all they did, God continued to show mercy. He remembered that they were they were just flesh and a passing breeze that does not return. How often they would rebel against him in the desert, and he grieved them in the wasteland. Again and again they put God to the test. They vexed the Holy One of Israel. Over and over these people did this. They did not remember his power, the day he redeemed them from the oppressor, the day that he displayed his miraculous signs in Egypt, the wonders in the region of Doan. He turned their rivers into blood. They could not drink from their stream. And then he goes here. He's now recounting what happened in Egypt. He sent swarms of flies that devoured them, and frogs that devastated. He gave to their crops the grasshopper, their produce to the locusts. He gave over their cattle to the hail, and their livestock to bolts of lightning. He destroyed their vines with sleet, and their sycamore trees with sleet and with hail. He unleashed against them his hot anger, his wrath, his indignation, and hostility. And he prepared in a path for his anger, and a band of destroying angels. He did not spare them from death, and he gave them over to a plague. He's describing here all the things that God had done in Egypt. And he says he struck down the firstborn of Egypt, the firstfruit of manhood of the tents of Ham. He says, and he brought his people out like a flock and led them like sheep through the desert. God delivered Israel and then led them out. He led captivity captive. He says he guided them to safety so they were unafraid. The sea engulfed their enemies. He brought them to the border of the Holy Land, to the hill country with his right hand. Led them through the sea, took them to through the Sinai, brought them to the border of the land. Thus, to the hill country, his right hand. He drove out nations before them and allotted lands to them in their inheritance. He settled the tribes of Israel in their homes. But guess what they did? They rebelled. They put the Lord to the test and rebelled against the Most High. They didn't keep his statutes. Like their fathers, they were disloyal and faithless, as reliable as a faulty bow. They angered him with their high places, and they roused his jealousy with their idols. They fell back into idolatry. God heard them, and he was very angry. He rejected Israel completely. He abandoned the tabernacle at Shiloh, a tent that he sent among them. He says, hey, listen, if you're going to turn away, we'll just abandon that idea. He sent the ark of his covenant into captivity, the splendor into the hands of an enemy. The Lord allowed the ark of the covenant to be taken by the Philistines. He gave his people over the sword. He was angry with his inheritance. Fire consumed the young man, and the maidens had no wedding songs. God's anger was in there. Their priests were put to the sword. Their widows could not weep. Then the Lord woke from his sleep, as a man wakes from a stupor and the way. He beat back his enemies. He put them to everlasting shame. Then he rejected the tents of Joseph, and he chose not the tribe of Ephraim. You know what? When you reject God, you end up going into some form of captivity because he gives them over. That's what Paul talked about in Romans chapter 1. But he chose the tribe of Judah from Zion, Mount Zion he loved. He built his sanctuary among the helps, and I should say among the heights, and from the earth he established forever. He chose David as his servant and took him from the sheep pen. From the tending the sheep, he brought him out to be the shepherd of his people, Jacob, of Israel his inheritance. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart. With skillful hands he led them. That is the promise. You see, even though we reject God, God does not forget us. And God brings someone into our lives that will lead us with integrity. And we want to be that individual today. So that's Psalm 78. That's a long psalm, but it is one that we should. It's a psalm about the nation of Israel's history and how that God dealt with them both in the negative and in the positive. My name is Robert Dean Steele. We've been praying through the Psalms. That was Psalm 78.